Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for session two. As you can see, we're starting part two, which is called the bee's knees. And for anybody who doesn't know, that's an old English or American saying that has multiple interpretations. So if you're interested, you can go and Google it. I think from what I Googled, the bee's knees is either short for business or is when something's really, really great. You can call it that's the bee's knees. So for anybody who's interested in linguistics. So today we'll be talking about wild bees and hoverflies, and we have two experts in the room with us. We've got Sara Reverte and Andrea Aracil, who are both working at or working on the EPIC project. So we're really excited to have them with us and to speak more about that. Can still see some people are entering the room. So we'll just give everybody a couple minutes more. I hope you all have water to stay hydrated, that your afternoon hasn't been too stressful. And if you haven't yet, perhaps get up and have a stretch. And we'll give everyone another minute or so to get in the room. Okay, it seems almost everybody is here. I'm sure there will be a few people who join later. So as we start, I want to start a little bit similar as to yesterday for those of us who joined, and we're going to start with a short Mentimeter. This is a surveying tool, and we would love for you to join us. You can either grab a second device and scan the QR code, or you can click on the link in the chat. I can see already 10 people have joined us. We've got about 4 questions to ask you, just to get to know you a little bit and to, yeah, get to know where everyone's from. You're also welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat. So we already have 20 people joining us on Mentimeter. That's great. We've got about 35 people with us in the room, so I'll give everyone a couple more moments. Yeah, feel free to open the tab up on your computer using the link or to get a phone and scan the QR code. Okay, I see a couple more people joining. That's lovely. Okay, we'll be moving on. So my first question for all of you is, did you join us for the session yesterday? I'm very curious to know if, people are particularly interested in the bees and hoverflies that we'll be talking about today, or they're here for the whole week, for the whole session, all 3 sessions. So great, we already have, yeah, most of them are saying yes. For those of you who weren't, we have some great news for you. As I had mentioned in the registration form, we said that Europark would be making recordings only available to members, but we have heard from our IT that we will be able to make this one publicly available for a short period of time. So for those of you who were worried about missing yesterday's session and perhaps not being Europark members, we will send you an email so you can look at the session in about a week or so. Oh, great to see that almost everybody was here. We hope you really enjoyed the session. It was great listening to the red list and all the new initiatives that were happening, and some of them really specific to certain habitats and certain species. Great. Okay, next question is the same one for those of you who were here yesterday. Where are you joining us from? Please put your little marker on the map. Um, I know that Sara and Andrea are really interested to see where you're from, and they weren't with us yesterday. So even if you filled it out yesterday, we're really keen to see the map again. And I hope for those of you who hadn't used Mentimeter yet, that with the repeated use, you're becoming more familiar and that you're enjoying a tool that, yeah, lets us learn a little bit about you and the audience before we start the session. Great. I think we have a couple more from Spain in this session and a couple more from Greece as well. Welcome. Almost everybody's answered it now. If you haven't, I'll give you another 2 seconds and then we'll move on. Okay, and another question the same as yesterday because we weren't sure how many would be joining that were with us yesterday. So once again, are you a ranger, environmental educator, a youth worker, a pollinator expert, a student, or other? The student was new because yesterday I think the majority of the people answered other, and we were quite curious as to what other group of people we have that are interested in pollinators and young people that would be attending our webinars. So great to see that our majority is environmental educators. We've got a couple of pollinator experts here. That's awesome. And lovely to have some rangers with as well. Okay, that's interesting. So the people who answered other yesterday were potentially not students. That was one of our thoughts. If you did answer other and you're willing to share with us, please do write in the chat so that we can make our surveys better and more interesting and informative for next time. Okay, I'll give you another 2 seconds to answer. Okay, and our last question today. We did see the map was very diverse from where everybody is from, and we would like to ask you just to start with a little bit of fun. What is the word for bumblebee in your language or any one of the languages that you speak? I am not going to try and pronounce those. I don't think I could do it any justice, but it's really cool to see. For any enthusiastic linguists in the room, I think this could also be a fun exercise. For anybody who is also a fan of Harry Potter, the word Dumbledore is also an old word for bumblebee in Old English, I believe. I'm not 100% certain, but in one of the languages spoken in the UK in the past. Great. Thank you very much for adding. That will stay open for you, but I will be stopping my screen there. And I would love to hand over to Sara and Andrea today. So the floor is all yours. Thank you very much for giving your time to us today. And we are so excited to hear what you have to tell us.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. My name is Andrea, and with me is Sara here. We are going to be presenting for you this afternoon the Europark Capacity Building second talk, which could be about wild bees and hoverflies. I want to take the advantage to thank you for the invitation and to thank everyone that is here for attending to this presentation. We are very happy to be here with you guys. And as Jessica has already said, both of us work in Epic project. Sara is working in Epic Bee, and I'm working in Epic Fly project. And we are going to be presenting you these few points that you see in the agenda for this afternoon. We are going to start with a short introduction, which will be mostly about pollinator diversity. Then Sara will explain you about wild bees. I will be speaking about hoverflies. Then we will give you a short view about which is the threatened pollinators that we have. Then we will be speaking about the introduction to the EPIC project from which we are part of. And then we will speak about some actions that young people can do to help pollinators and where we can find the resources to support the activities. Please do not hesitate to raise your hand and ask us during the presentation or write the questions in the chat. We are separated the presentation in 5 different blocks, so we will give some space for questions at the end of each block. And if not, at the end of the presentation, we will have some time for all of us to speak a little bit about what we have presented to you here, okay? So Sara, please. Thank you. The first blog is going to be about pollinator diversity. And we are going to give you few information about this. But first of all, I think it's important to define what a pollinator is. I think all of you here know that, but just in case, we define a pollinator just as an animal that transfers pollen from a male flower to a female flower, and that facilitates the reproduction of the plants themselves, and it has some repercussions or some consequences that we will see later on. If we focus in the insects, in here in this slide, you can see many of the examples that we have as pollinators in the insect world, being the most important ones the bees, the hoverflies, and then also butterflies, moths, and beetles. Just as a highlight, we will speak about that later on a bit in deep, but in the European monitorings that we have currently, the insects that are being considered as pollinators for monitoring are bees, hoverflies, and butterflies and moths. Regarding the diversity for bees and hoverflies, both of them are the most important groups of pollinators. As I have just said, and for Europe, we have about 2,000 species of bees and about 900 species of hoverflies. We will give you some data about this later on. Please, Sarah. Regarding the importance of pollination for the plants, we have to say that four of five of the flowering plants normally depend on pollination to produce seeds and fruits. Therefore, pollination is very important because if we don't have that, four of five different plants will not produce any seeds and any fruits. And if we translate this into money, it means that we have about 5 billion euros depending on pollination in the European territory annually, mostly dedicated to agricultural production that depends on pollination. But in any case, this is an important data that we use to raise important for pollination in terms of economy, but we do not need to fall in this utilitarist trap of preserving the pollinators because we need them. We need to preserve the pollinators because they are also important and the diversity is important, but also it's important because we need them. So we need to have these two ideas into account. And why we need them? Exactly, this is the point. As I was mentioning, pollination is the process by which we obtain fruits and food from the plants. If we don't have these pollinators, we will lose the fruits on four out of five of the plants that we have. And here you can see very easily the difference of a breakfast in our daily life if we have and if we don't have pollinators in our lives. If we do have pollinators, we have a very diverse breakfast with all the resources that we normally have nowadays. But if we lose the pollinators and they do not do their ecological behavior, we are going to lose most of the things that we use for eating. And not only, as you can see in the picture, we are not going to lose only the things that come directly from the plants, but also things that come from other sources that they depend secondarily from the plants. For example, the milk, because the cows that produce the milk depend on the plants that are depending on the pollinators. So what we try to say in this slide is that everything is connected, and pollinators are important not only for this direct production of the fruits that we are going to eat, but also for other different processes that we have in our day life. And if you go through, Sara, with this, we finish this first short introduction process. I'm not sure if there's any question that we can raise now or we should continue. Is there something in the chat? I cannot see it.
There are no questions yet in the chat, but I
Okay.
had one for you. I was quite surprised to see the meat. I hadn't really
Yeah.
thought about that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think personally, I assumed that a lot of meat was fed on corn.
Yes, but still there are some of other meats that are not fed by corn. So that's why we also include that as a thing that could disappear from the
Okay.
source.
That's really interesting to think about. Thank you.
Yeah. It's just to show this interconnection of all the resources.
Yeah, it's great. Those visuals are always important.
Mhm. Okay.
Second, yes. So I need to because I cannot unmute myself if I don't get out of the screen. Actually, there is a lot of cows also that are fed with alfalfa, and alfalfa is directly needs some specialist bees for their pollination. So this is also part of what is included in this slide.
Ah, thanks. That's really interesting.
So now we're gonna introduce the wild bees, and many of you here are already aware. But why I say the word wild? Because when I say bees in a general public context, many people is like, "Oh, bees! I love honey." Wait, honeybees are a completely different thing. So here we don't include, when we talk about conservation and stuff, we don't include honeybees. Why? Because honeybees are a managed species. So it's like if we're considering biodiversity as chicken, for example. So honeybees are a species that they are managed by uh, beekeepers, that they have veterinaries. They are fed sugar in wintertime. There are no flowers around. If they are sick, they get medicine. So it's really, in many cases, they are housed in these artificial boxes. So because this is easier for the beekeeper to extract the honey and stuff like that. And that's why they are still important for the ecosystem. They still pollinate a lot of crops and stuff like that. But when we talk about biodiversity, this is not, they are normally not included there. We talk about all the other bees. And in the next slide, I just present nice photos. Honestly, it's just to show you nice pictures of what kind of wild bees we have. So in the middle, you still have the honeybee, and you have around several wild bees that they look like the honeybees, or kind of look like honeybees. And some people in the field may even confuse them, but they are not. These are like solitary bees, wild. They have nothing to do with the honeybees, the ones that are in the sides, in both sides. Then bumblebees are next to honeybees, are the ones that are well known by the public. When you say bumblebees, people is like, oh, they're so cute, they're big and fluffy. But you also have some other big and fluffy solitary bees like Antophora or Dasypoda or Amegilla. They are so funny to see in the field. And we start entering into the territory of the smaller bees, less hairy, with different colors that are not typically associated to bees. In this case, we have several that can have like red colors, orange or brown colors, or even some that are tiny and black or not hairy at all. And many of the people like see them in the field and they would never imagine that this is a bee. Some people tell us, oh, I thought it was a fly. Oh, I thought that was an ant or something, or a wasp. And some really look like wasps. So the photo you have in the middle, it is a wasp. But the ones that are on the sides are solitary bees, that which some can be more or less similar, but especially the nomada in the top right side can be confused by some smaller wasps. So, about how many species we have in Europe, the most recent publication from last year, it says that we have 2,187 bee species in Europe, the honeybee included. And where do we find most of them? Bees are, at the European context, most of the diversity is found in the south of Europe. So the countries with the highest diversity are Spain, Greece, and Italy. And bees like Mediterranean areas. Why? It is related to the biology of the bees. Even if they are not social, even if they are still solitary, many species, they normally make nests. And in this nest, like the mother bee puts the eggs and put the food next to the egg and close the nest, so the egg will hatch, the larva will develop always inside the nest until it is next year, until it's the season to go out, and they go directly as adults. So they can easily spend like 11 months or 12 months out inside the nest. So then what happens? They are very sensitive to the environmental conditions. And if you have dry, wet places, they don't like it because the larvae can get moldy, or if there are floods, like the larvae can die or stuff like that. So they like Mediterranean areas because they are warm, so they have good temperature to develop, and they are more wet, more dry. Sorry, there is less humidity, and they can survive better. So the more north you go in Europe, in Scandinavia, is where you have the smaller amount of species. But at least for bumblebees are a bit unique in this sense. There's around 70 species of bumblebees in Europe. They like cold. So most of the species are social, and they are bigger and more hairy, so they are more adapted to cold environments rather than some other species. And in bumblebees, you have the opposite trend. The more north you go, you have a higher diversity. And this is different from the total trend of the bees. So the more than 2,000 species that we have in Europe is distributed among 6 different families. There are 7 at the world scale, but in Europe we have 6 bee families: Apidae, Meacylidae, Coletidae, Alictidae, Andrenidae, and Melitidae. And in the pictures in the left side, you have like representatives of all the different families. So if we move to the ecology of the bees, what do they eat and how? So bees exclusively feed on pollen and nectar. So nectar, the adults feed it for themselves. So it's kind of like it's water with sugar and a bit more other stuff. So it's their fuel. They use it to feed themselves, and they also collect it for feeding the larva. And the females also collect pollen for the larvae. The pollen is exclusively for the next generation. So when they feed on nectar, the composition of the nectar in the different plants is more or less the same. So it can be a bit more watery, more sugary, but it's more similar chemically. So they can feed normally on no matter what plant. So they can take nectar from any source. But when we talk about the pollen, they are they can be more specialist. So we have it's a continuum. We have some species that are totally generalist. They can take pollen from any kind of source. They collect it from any plant that they find around their nest, and they bring it to the cells, to the nest cells for the larvae. Or there are some species that are in the other extreme of the continuum, some species that are totally specialist. So they really need one plant they only can take pollen from this particular plant. And what happens if the plant is not available? The bee cat then doesn't have any food. So the distribution of the specialist bees is always associated to the distribution of the plant. And you have many species that are in the middle of the continuum. Some can be more generalist, but not totally. Some can be more specialist, but still can feed on a few different plants. So it really depends on the species. But the continuum, it's biased to the generalism. They tend to be a bit more generalist than specialist. So in terms of nesting, so this is one of the important traits of the bees, that they make the nest. In many other groups, the larva, the females put the eggs in the vegetation or somewhere, the eggs hatch, and the larva is free living. So the larva feeds for themselves, and they can move or they can find their own resources. But in bees, they put the eggs together with the food in a closed environment, and the larva will never move, will be all the time inside this area. It will pupate there, and then it will emerge already as adult. But they depend exclusively on the food that the mother has prepared for them. And so there are several different substrates in which they make nests. The most common is the ones that they make nests on the ground, on the soil. So like the one in the picture, they can be sandy soil or clay or different soils, but they with the legs they scratch and they dig some galleries inside, and they normally generate between 5 and 10 nest cavities, like nest cells, where they put like one egg per cavity. But there are some others that they don't use soil, but they use wood, for example. There are some bigger species, like I don't know if you know the chilocopas, that there are some big like that, and they have very powerful mandibles, so they chew their way inside the wood. So they make galleries, they generate galleries. And there are other species that they cannot generate galleries, but they reuse galleries that are already available inside wood, galleries made by Coleoptera or by some Lepidoptera larva or any other animal. They can only use cavities that are already existing, or they like stone walls, or they in even in buildings you can in spring you will start seeing in the facades of the buildings, you will see bees coming and going inside of the holes that are between the masonry. Some can make the nest inside empty stems, and there are multiple variations of where they can make the nest. They can even make nest inside snail shells, empty snail shells. There are many different um, strategies, but the soil and the wood are the most common. So about, okay, this is where they nest, but what do they use? What materials do they use to make their nest? Some not only dig the galleries in soil, but when they use galleries that already exist, they sometimes they line the interior of the gallery with some materials. In this case, in this slide, we present the case of leaf cutter bees. They are very cute. Like you see in the picture, you see this, and your heart melts. And they go to vegetation. They cut with the mandibles. They cut a piece of the leaf, and they bring it inside the nest, and they generate these structures you can see on the lower side, right? Like this kind of cigarettes. And inside this, you will find different. If you open it, there will be different cells and different eggs with the bowl of pollen and nectar. And some don't do it with leaves, but they do it with petals, or some they do it even with these plants that the stems are like a little bit hairy, like a bit woolly. So they cut it with the mandibles, and the nests are very fluffy, are very cute. Any questions about the bees so far?
Yeah, we have two questions in the chat. The first one was with regards to the map. The question was, in the Balkan countries, there appears to be quite a bit of white on the map for bee diversity, signifying a low diversity. Is that accurate in comparison, or is it just that there's not as much data for those areas?
Yeah, it's most probably we know we have a lack of, now it's becoming better, but we have historically a lack of sampling in the Balkan countries. And that means that we have less data, and we are now with several partners, we are trying to catch up and generate new data. But this is one of the problems we have, is when we have no data, it's a kind of an artifact that it says there are less species. Yes.
Thank you for that. Hopefully, we will be helping with that, getting junior
Hey.
rangers and other youth groups to help to be interested and then specialize as well in the future, potentially. There is a second question. It is, are some specialist bee species only able to collect pollen from one plant because of where the pollen is in the plant? For example, it meets their tongue length, or is the composition of the pollen that meets their requirements for why they select that kind of pollen?
Is mostly related to the chemistry of the pollen, because sometimes you have some pollen that have some chemicals, or that are trying to deter the herbivores that are coming and collect a lot of pollen, and gives kind of no benefit to the plant. So they have these strategies of some bees become specialists with this plant so they can detoxify the the toxins in the pollen, and they become specialists with these flowers. Is more a matter of they can feed on this plant, so it becomes advantageous to feed on them rather than access. Because tongue length in this case is more important for nectar than for pollen.
Thank you. That
Pollen.
was super interesting. And in the chat, I see we said thank you as well. If there is anybody who would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, I've just enabled that. So feel free to put your hand up if you have any other question. In the meantime, I have a small question as well for Sarah. When it comes to the social structure, I know there's a lot of information about honeybees and the queen and the female worker bees and the males. How is that structure similar in wild bees? And then how does it differ in, for example, solitary bees?
And in bees is interesting because you have like two all extremes. More than 70% of the species are totally solitary, like one female, one baby, almost like in humans, or one female, a few babies. But you have like some species that are called communal, so it's they make kind of a neighborhood. Them some different females can nest next to each other, and they don't interact, but they still are close. Sometimes they are they can in other structures they can have a big common nest where every female is taking care of their own nest inside the big structure, but they make turns to take care of the entrance to make sure like no parasites or no predators are entering. And you have like bumblebees are an example of completely social species, and you have similar, maybe a degree less because the colonies are smaller of complexity, but it's kind of similar to the honeybee. You have the queen. Queen starts to produce workers, and the workers then tend the eggs that are produced by the queen. So, does it answer your question?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you so much. I don't see any more questions in the chat, and no one has raised their hand, so feel free to carry on with hoverflies.
Okay. Great. So now we change the topic into the diversity and a bit of biology and ecology of hoverflies. First, I want to say a few things that for you to have an idea to compare of what Sara has been mentioning. Sara has just said that they have 6 different families in the world of the bees. In the case of the hoverflies, everything is included in the same family. So our diversity is not as high as the one the bees have, but you will see later on that really we have a lot of different morphologies. In the world, we have 6,200 species divided in about 200 genera. And in Europe, we have 900 species in approximately 100 genera. As Sara has said, most of the diversity is placed in Southern Europe, across the Mediterranean basin. In this case, it's also depending on the larval biology, but larvae are much more diverse inside of hoverflies, so they are not as restrictive as Sara was mentioning. So there are many different things that affect the distribution of hoverflies, but mostly we have the big diversity is placed in the Mediterranean basin. I want to highlight that we will speak about this later on, but some of the hoverflies do mimics for bees, wasps, and bumblebees. And one easy way to distinguish between them and the bees that they are trying to mimic is the amount of wings that they have. Bees always are going to have 2 pairs of wings, so to say 4 wings. And in the case of hoverflies, we only have 2 wings. So if you see something that looks like a bee but only have 2 wings, probably it's going to be a hoverfly. And this is because Sylphidae family of hoverflies are included in Diptera order. And as the name itself means, in Diptera we only have 2 wings. So it's an easy way to distinguish when we are in doubt of if something is or not a bee or a hoverfly. Okay, so Sarah, please, if you go ahead, thank you. We can call all the insects that are included in Syrphid family in two different ways. We can call them flowerflies or we can call them hoverflies. And these two names have two main reasons. So we are very straightforward in hoverfly community. So we use names that we can explain why we use them. So we call them flowerflies because they are the biggest or the most important group inside of Diptera order which are involved in pollination. So we normally see hoverflies in the flowers, eating the pollen and nectar because adults have this anthophilous character. They feed on pollen and nectar, like in bees, but in our case, it's only with the adults. Larvae of hoverflies feed in completely different things in a huge range because we have larvae that feed on plants, like on fresh tissue. We have some of them that are saprophagous, we have some of them that are zoophagous, predators, huge range of feeding habits in larvae, but in adults, they feed on pollen and nectar, so they are all the time related with the flowers, and that's why we call them flower flies. And related with the most common name or the most used name, this name that is called hoverflies, this is because the way that they have of flying. When we see hoverflies in the field, we will see that they have this steady flight, very characteristic. They get completely suspended in the air, like static. They have the same flight like a chopper or a helicopter. So that's why this kind of flying is called hovering. And that's why we call a Syrphid family a hoverflies because of this kind of unique flight ability that they have that can also help us to distinguish them in the field if we are not used to see them in the field. So just remember these two names and the characteristics that give those names to the family. Sarah, perfect. We have already been speaking about this, but I want to make a short informative part about this, why syrphids are good as pollinators, because when we think about pollinators, at first we always think about wild bees and bumblebees, but also hoverflies are really good pollinators. They are the second big group which is considered as pollinators behind the bees, and this is because two main reasons. First of all, this anthophilous character that I was mentioning related with the adults, they feed on pollen and nectar, and that is why they are all the time in touch with the flowers. So they are able to obtain and to take some pollen with themselves, even though they don't have as huge modifications, as huge morphological adaptations that we can see in the bees, they still have some things that can help them to take this pollen. For example, they have what we call these palinophilic seta, which are some long hairs that can retain some pollen. In the picture that you have in the bottom left, you can see that the face of this hoverfly is completely covered by pollen grains. So even though they don't have very specific structures to obtain pollen, they do have some adaptations to have this pollen on their body. And also they have huge floral constancy, which means that they are all the time going to the flowers one again and again and again. So even though they are not very efficient in terms of morphological adaptations, as they are constantly on top of the flowers, they are able to move this pollen quite efficiently. That's why they are being considered the second group of pollinators currently, not only in crops, but also in natural environments. So if you go, Sarah, please. Here we have some data about their efficiency in pollinating. As I mentioned, it's not only natural ecosystems, but also in crops. But if we first focus in natural ecosystems, there are some studies that prove that almost 70% of the plant species which are pollinated by insects are visited by hoverflies. So from all the range of flowers that we have that can be pollinated by insects, hoverflies are able to pollinate 70% of them, which is a quite high range. And also, here is important to highlight that in the case of the hoverflies, they are really generalistic. It's not unlike in bees that they are more specialists, like Sarah was explaining. In our case, or in the case of the hoverflies, most of the species are generalistics. And so they don't have that limitation that in some cases bees can have due to the especially behavior. And also in the crops, as I was mentioning, Diptera is the second big order of insects that are used in crops to pollinate. And hoverflies are covering around 72%, Diptera in general covering around 72%, against the 93% that covers Hymenoptera, bees, wasps, bumblebees, etc. And from this 72%, half of it is covered by hoverflies. So it's really a high percentage. Nowadays, there are a lot of companies which are producing hoverflies in a massive way to be used in crops as pollinators. And the two top hoverfly species that are produced for this sense are Epicerphus valdeatus and Eristalix tenax, which are also two of the most common species that we can see in nature. Great, but as I was saying before, we don't have to think of the pollinators only, but the things that they can provide to us, but also but what they are by themselves. And as I was saying, in Sylphid family, we only have one family, but we really have a huge diversity in all terms. And when I say in all terms, I really mean in all terms. We will see now a lot of pictures of how different can look the hoverflies between them. First of all, we can have very different the difference in sizes. Here in the pictures, you cannot really appreciate that. But for example, the picture on the right, this small hoverfly, which is black, is less than 5 millimeters long. And the one that you have on the left, which is a 1 milesi, a very big one, is about 2 centimeters high. So it's really huge difference in size inside of the same family. And we don't have that only in different genus, but we also have that size variation inside of a same genus between species. For example, in genus Calosia, we have very small species, about 5 millimeters, and we have some of them that can reach approximately 10 or 15 millimeters, with things that are exactly the same genus, different species. So really, really diverse in size. If you go, Sara, please. But also we have huge diversity in morphological adaptations, mostly in the abdomen. You can see on the right side of the screen the very different morphologies related with hoverflies. Everything that is in the pictures are hoverflies. We have normally some of them we can have elongated abdomens, like the ones on the top. But for example, in the middle, we can see two examples of hoverflies which have constricted abdomen. They have the abdomen with like a wasp shape, so to say. We have then some of them that can have abdomen more rounded and be more robust and big, which are the ones on the very low part of the presentation. And then also we can see some of them having very long hairs, like looking like bumblebees, and some of them lacking any hairs. There are some of them that are like in between with presence of some hairs. So really also very diverse in terms of morphological adaptations. But for me, the highest diversity is related with the color patterns. So Sara, if you go, please. Yes, here we have different patterns of coloration. We have three different morphotypes in terms of patterns of colors. In this set of pictures that you can see here, we have a lot of hoverflies, which have yellow markings in the abdomen or in the thorax, yellow or orange markings at some point in their bodies. These are like the ones that we most commonly think about when we think about a hoverfly. But we also have some of them which are completely black. If we go to the next slide, please. Yes, you see here, these all, again, are hoverflies, completely different than the ones that we were seeing previously. All of them are blackish, but we can have some of them which are like shiny with metallic colors in the thorax and in the abdomen. And also we have some of them which have reddish patterns of colors. If we move to this next slide. There you go. In here we can have a lot of patterns which are more reddish or dark orange, mostly in abdomen. And also the one that you have on bottom right, which is Ferdinandea aurea, this is one of the hoverflies which are completely shiny with this metallic green and golden metallic colors that when the light hits this species, they are really, really shiny and they are very easy to see in the field and really amazing to be observed in nature. And also it's important to mention, if we move this to the next, there we go. Here we have one important thing that I have already mentioned, but I think it's important to highlight, is that hoverflies normally, in much of the cases, we have just seen that we really have a lot of diversity, but there's a huge amount of the species of hoverflies which normally have what we call Batesian mimicry. This means that the species exhibit some mimicry for protecting themselves, and they try to imitate other insects to protect themselves. They mostly imitate bees, wasps, and bumblebees. Here you have two examples. All the pictures in the right are different species of hoverflies. All of them are different between them, and they all mimic bumblebees. And I must say that they mimic bumblebees really well. If you don't see them flying in the field, sometimes it's very difficult to be sure if what you have on your hands is a bumblebee or a hoverfly. Sometimes I collected some of these hoverflies thinking that it was really a hoverfly, and in the end I got stung because it was a bumblebee. So some they are really, really good um, mimickers. And also on the left side, you have two cases. Sorry, thank you, Sarah. Two cases of two species which mimic wasps. And I want to just take a moment to explain you the case of Temnostoma biforme. Is the case that the picture that you have in the bottom right part. If you see, the first pair of legs of these species are black, and normally what they do is to project them forward. So they are not only imitating the wasps in the appearance, but also in the behavior. They put the forelegs on top to imitate the big antenna of the wasps. So is this projection of the legs is for them to look like a really wasp because the legs are like the antenna of the wasp. So it's really very interesting to see how a part of the appearance of the hoverfly, the behavior that they do in nature, is also for these mimics of the wasps. And with this, from my side, is everything that I wanted to explain you for hoverflies. I'm not sure if someone has any question related with them.
No questions so far. I
Okay.
had just a simple question. You
Mhm.
mentioned that some hoverflies are managed for crop pollination. How
Yes.
does that impact the conservation? And also just from a logistics perspective, how do they make them come back and go home with you?
No, 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 you don't. I mean, when you release them in the crops for pollinating, you are not expecting them to come back. I mean, hoverflies have really short periods, short life cycles. They are maybe a matter of some weeks or some months at maximum. And normally, when we do this kind of research or this kind of use of the hoverflies, either we use them inside of greenhouses, so they are going to be there until they die, or maybe there are some cases, this is really something that is starting, so not everyone is doing that, but maybe they are also preparing the way to complete the life cycle inside of the greenhouse, in the way that you have only to release them once and they can reproduce, and a larvae can also develop inside of the greenhouse and do like the whole cycle. So you like establish like a small ecosystem inside of the greenhouse. And if we do some release in open crops, we just need to put some plants for them to be interested in remaining in that crop, because the crops, I mean the open crops for sure, they can just be free and fly wherever they want. In that case, we always use for sure species that are present in the area in which we are releasing the insects, to not concern any part of the natural ecosystems. And we normally use species which are quite common in nature already, to avoid that huge releases can affect the the balance of the ecosystem in the area.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting.
Welcome.
Still no questions in the chat. I think you can go on. Oh, wait, we might have one now. It said, do you know of any cases where syrphids are used for both pollination and biological control of
Yes.
aphids?
Yes, exactly. That was what I meant, because a larva of some species, there's a huge part of hoverflies that larvae are aphid feeders, quite good and efficient aphid feeders. So we are using as well hoverflies only for pest control. And now what we are trying to do is to combine these two processes, these two ecosystem services. And that's what I meant, that in some cases you have the larva controlling the aphids, and at the same time when the adults emerge, they are doing the pollination services to the crops. So it's something that needs to be really controlled, because sometimes you need higher percentage of adults to do really good pollination services. But yes, it's something that can be also done.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So shall we move on with the status of the pollinators?
Yes.
Good. So here we wanted to talk about the status. So the threatened species comes with understanding how is the status of bees and hoverflies in Europe in this case, and the information we took it from the European Red List of hoverflies published in 2022, and the Red List of bees that has been, the data was released in October last year, but the report will be published anytime soon. So what is the status of the hoverflies? So if you're not familiar with the IUCN categories, so we have in dark green the LC, which is least concern, which means that the species are doing okay. So there is no imminent risk for them to anything to happen. Then in yellow and light green, NT is nearly threatened. VU in yellow is vulnerable. EN is endangered. CR critically endangered, possibly. Okay, in bees we use possibly extinct. I guess here is the same. RE is regionally extinct and data deficient. DD. So for the hoverflies, we see that half of the fauna is doing okay, but that means that half of the fauna we either don't know or it's not doing okay. So we have like more than a quarter of the fauna which is threatened with extinction in a smaller or bigger degree, and still a 7% which for now is okay, they're nearly threatened, but if the situation changes, they are going to be endangered with threatened with extinction in the near future. So still a significant amount of the fauna that is or will be soon threatened. For the bees, the situation is slightly better. We have around 2/3 of the fauna which is least concern, and for the other third we have half, like around 16% of the fauna which is data deficient. We don't know what's going on with these species. We don't know if they are doing okay or not, but considering that the data deficient species are normally the least abundant or the most rare, we can guess that they're not going to be thriving. And from the other lots, we have in total the categories of threatened with extinction are a bit more than 10%, and a bit more than 10% too for the nearly threatened. So the situation is a bit more critical for the hoverflies than for the bees at the current moment. So, but for insects in this case, hoverflies and bees, how do we obtain the information of the status of the species? Mostly with the information on the distribution. So we get all the data we can of all the records we can, like this species was found there at this time, and we can get the map across Europe. And if we know, or we can assume that the distribution area is gonna be reduced, then is when we say that the species is threatened. But it can happen that the species will stay in the same areas, but the population size is going to reduce or it's going to go better. So we have way less information on the trends of the population. If the population is stable, if it's increasing, if it's decreasing. So the situation in terms of how much do we know is quite similar for both hoverflies and bees. We have around 60% of the fauna for which we don't have any data on the trends of the population. And for the species that we do know, we have a big chunk that is stable. The second biggest chunk is decreasing, and only a minor, tiny fraction of the species that are increasing the size of the population. We know the group, at least for bees, that is better studied are bumblebees, because these are is one of the groups that historically attracted most of the attraction of the interest of the people who's working with insects. And we have like historical records, and we have like longitudinal studies in the same area, so we have better data of in the beginning of the 20th century and now how the size of the population changed. So we see that in certain groups, even if the total map, like the distribution area, stays the same, the amount of individuals that we see now, it's getting lower and lower, and with the current threats that they have, they will be, in the next decades, they will be threatened with extinction, because they are going to lose, with the increase in climate change and stuff like that, they are going to lose also available territory. So what are the threats? So what is this driving the species to become endangered, to become, or to lose population size? So for both hoverflies and bees, the main 5 drivers are the same, not in the same importance, but the drivers are the same. So one of the most important is the intensification of the agriculture. So what we see compared to 100 years ago, 200 years ago, what we have now are bigger fields, totally monocultures. So on the one side, if you have a monoculture, you have one plant producing one type of flower, one type of floral resource. End of the story. So in terms of pollinators, you will only have in this crop the insects that can feed successfully on the crop. If they need at least 2 plant resources, they are not going to be there because they only have one. And the intensification of the agriculture also, it comes associated with industrialization, like the tilling of the ground, like more intensely, like destruction of natural habitats because you want to make the farms bigger, or the, if native vegetation, I don't like the word weeds at all, like I prefer wild plants. If there are poppies or something trying to grow inside the field, like farmers don't like it, and they start using herbicides, so they kill every other floral resource available. And directly in agriculture, they use a lot of insecticides that are used to kill the pests, but indirectly, pollinators are insects, so they are also affected. And there is also, connected to this, one of the main drivers is pollution. So one kind of pollution is the pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, etc. But also many kinds of pollution derived from human activities. It can be also um, heavy metals. It can be any kind of chemical or contamination that we make on the environment that is affecting all the species. Another one is the modification of the natural habitat. So the picture that you see in the middle, I really like this one because it's very graphic. So many people see this as like, oh, what a cute park. It's a park here in Brussels. And it's like, okay, look it carefully. Do you see anything that can be useful for pollinators? Literally nothing. The trees are not even native. The trees are planted because they are beautiful. The grass has been cut very short, so no flower is available because you need to have like this green carpet and nothing else. So everything that could be useful for pollinators is dead, and you don't even have like ground, available ground for the bees that nest in the ground. Is everything is covered with this grass, and you don't even have old trees or trees with dead branches that could be useful for the hoverfly larvae. You have nothing because this is ugly, and the park managers remove it. It can be a person could pass and it could fall on their head. So this is a way of reducing the resources for them, for pollinators. Something that is very obvious and we don't necessarily have in mind is the development of urban environments. So this is a photo of Bruges. It's a city here in Belgium. Same. We are used to this, but there is not a square centimeter that is useful for pollinators in a city. If you have in the ground, everything is like concrete. You have houses, industrial developments, parking lots. If you have vegetation, is normally either invasive or planted, which in many cases means that it's non-native. It's starting to get better, but historically, cities were very hostile environments for pollinators. And climate change and extreme events is also an important driver. Like the more the temperature increases, the more the biodiversity is affected, not only pollinators but many other groups. Any questions about the status of the group pollinators?
I'll give everyone a moment to write a question if they have one. There was a question from the previous section that was a little bit late, and it was for Andrea. Do you know of any syrphid larvae that predate on caterpillars? Um,
It is not really common because most of the predator larvae are for aphids. The vast majority of predators are focused on different kinds of aphids. But it comes to my mind is Chiodon genus, which has a couple of species that can feed in small caterpillars, but really they are not feeding in big ones. So it's like small larvae of caterpillars can be also a food source for this particular genus.
Thank you very much. Can we move on then?
Okay, so we can continue. I'm going to explain you now which is EPIC, but first we need to speak about why EPIC project is now being developed. As Sara was mentioning now with this threatened of pollinators, it is really well known that pollinators are now in a huge decline. We have been seeing that with the data that Sara shared with us, but we can see that in our day life. Here you have a very clear example. If you are used to go to nature, you will notice that nowadays the windshield of our car do not get as dirty and was before, because when we were driving in natural areas, our windshield normally was completely full of bugs that were hitting on the shield itself. And nowadays this is not common anymore. You can see in these two pictures that difference between the density of bugs that we got in the windshield of the car before and nowadays. So this is really some way to really see that the decline of pollinators and the decline of insects, it's a matter. It's something that is real. I mean, we can do a lot of IUCN lists, we can do a lot of research, but this is something that we can use as a good example to show to all the citizens this real problem that we are facing. So there's also a concept which is this shifting baseline. The shifting baseline is like the situation of nature or some environmental aspect in the moment that we are born. So it's like the baseline, the level in which something is placed up to this moment. And we have some data and some research that proves that this baseline for insects was much, much higher 50 or 100 years ago. And now the situation in the diversity and the amount of species and specimens, it's much, much lower than it was long time ago. So what we want to say from here is that really the pollinators are declining. And in the EU, they have developed the first restoration law, which applies to the conservation of nature. So member states have published this law. It was published, I think, November of last year, no, Sara? The law? Something like that. Across last year, this was published. I cannot remember now exactly the moment. But this is the first law that is focused only in the recovery of nature and environmental areas inside of the EU member states. The main goal that is established by this law is to recover or restore the 20% of the European natural land for the 2030 year to 2030 year. So in 4 years. So it's really a big challenge, and is mostly focused in biodiversity and degraded ecosystems. But the thing here is that first, in some aspects, we need Oh, see, I saw in the chat that they are mentioning summer 2024. Yes, thank you. The restoration law was in 2024. We have already changed year and I haven't realized. And it was in the summer of 2024. Thank you for the note that was done in the chat. So what I was saying is that for restoring some of the data, restoring some of the ecosystems and diversity that we had, first we need to know what we do have. And that's what one of the important points of this nature restoration law. So if you go through, Sara, please. The idea is to have, oh, but this is some, sorry, I got a mistake here. So this is a background of why the nature restoration law was applied. So up to now, we have 80% of the habitats in poor conditions in European territory. 10%, as Sara was mentioning, of bees and also butterflies have a risk of extinction. And 70% of the soils that we have unhealthy conditions. So all this data needs to be restored. And the restoration process is just a recovery of the ecosystem that has been degraded or damaged. If you go further, please. Then pollinators are important part of this nature restoration law. In this case, in this law, as we mentioned at the beginning of this talk, bees, wild bees, hoverflies, and butterflies are the pollinators that have been included in this law and are the ones that are going to be included in the monitoring that it has been established also by this law. We will speak about this monitoring in a minute. And the rule that applies to these pollinators is to reverse the pollinator declining that we have just shown you that is happening right now and increase their populations by the year 2030. And we have included you here one sentence that we really like a lot and that gives us the focus on what we should preserve, because normally we are all the time focusing in big animals that give us some empathy, so to say. But in this sentence, they say that we worry about saving the grizzly bear, but where is the grizzly bear without the bee that pollinates the berries that they eat, and the flies that sustain the baby salmon that they eat as well? So as we were mentioning before, everything here is very connected. So pollinators do matter, and we need to focus in them, not only in big and nice animals like grizzly bears. And here, I'm not saying that insects are not nice, because for sure we are using overtime in them, and they are really beautiful. Do not mislead what I'm saying. So if you go further, Sara, please. So here, this is the broad perspective of what we have been doing so far related with the nature restoration law. And that was what I wanted to explain before. For preserving or restoring what we have, first we need to know and control the populations that we have. And that's why inside of this law, they have designed a EU pollinator monitoring scheme, which will do a systematic monitoring analysis of all the EU countries, and they are going to sample systematically bees, hoverflies, and butterflies to control and analyze the population variations. And with this data that we obtain from the monitoring, we will have the positive trends in population if the restoration is done properly. So here you have like a timeline of what has been the process of designing this EU pollinator monitoring scheme. This started in 2019, sorry, with the EU Pollinator Initiative. And with that, the first STING project was launched at the European level. STING is an acronym of Science and Technology for Pollinating Insects. And this project started with the first approaches into which was the best way to monitor pollinators. This has been really a huge debate in the last 7 years. Sara and myself has been in most of these debates, and really has been a huge work in designing which is the best way to do this monitoring. Then after this first STING project, some recommendations were launched, and from there, some extra projects were started, which were Spring, Orbit, and Taxofly. Orbit and Taxofly have been developing a lot of resources in terms of images and information of the biology of all the species. They are really done a huge and very nice work, which will be published very, very soon, and you will have two website portals with all the information that we have related with biology and images of hoverflies and bees. Sara will explain you a bit more about that later on. And spring was one project in which we did an analysis of the monitoring design that was previously done, and with those results, Sting 2 appeared, second project with a lot of recommendations, and from there they designed the first monitoring. And what we realized is that we needed a lot of taxonomists, a lot of people with huge and enough level of taxonomy to be able to do this monitoring, because we need people that have enough knowledge to be part of the monitoring in the three taxonomical groups that we are going to analyze with the nature restoration law that is going to start next year. So what we are doing in EPIC is really train and enlarge this amount of taxonomies that we have in Europe for doing the monitoring. In a very simplified way, this is the big aim of EPIC. And now also we have Sting Plus, which is the one that is doing all the recommendations for the last minute things for the monitoring that will start next year. So if you go through, Sara, please. So the main aim, long story short, the main aim that we have in EPIC project is to enlarge the taxonomic capacity of the EU member states, to create the next generation of taxonomies, which will be the ones doing the monitoring in all the countries of the EU, and will be the ones who have enough knowledge to do this monitoring scheme. And we are three different projects. I mean, all of us are inside of this EPIC group, but we have one project which is EPIC B, which is mostly focused in bee training. EPIC Fly is focused in hoverfly training, and EPIC Butterfly is focused in butterfly training. Cristina is also here with us, and she will do the presentation related EPIC Butterfly tomorrow. So I'm going to give you a few information about what is EPIC Fly and what is EPIC B. In the case of EPIC Fly, we have divided Europe in 4 different regions. So we are training people, putting them together in these 4 different regions. One is Northern region, the other one, which is in blue, the Eastern region, which is in yellow. Then we have a Central one in orange, and the Southwestern, which is the green one, the one that I'm coordinating from Alicante. If you go further, we have designed a continuous learning of 4 different levels of training. We do a basic course in which we teach people how to identify up to genus level. Then we do 2 intermediates to teach people to identify up to species level. And then we also have an advanced course to be able to identify more difficult genera. I must say that in this case, and also for EPIC B, we have most of the courses fully booked up to now. We are going to have an extension of the project, so maybe at some point some open places will be available if anyone is interested, but up to now everything that we have is booked. And if you go further, in the case of EPIC B, they divided Europe in 6 different regions according to the fauna and also to the expertise and the amount of previous expertise, the capacity that was already present in each one of the regions. As I have said, bees are more diverse than hoverflies, so that's why they needed to divide Europe in more places, because they have more diversity to apply. And the number of trainings also has been adapted to the taxonomic capacity of the area. They have more trainings in southern regions, because in southern regions we normally have less capacity, less previous taxonomic capacity, and then that's why more effort was needed to be done in those areas. And if you go further again, in this case, in EPIC B, they have 5 different levels of training. Again, it's also a continuous way of learning. The level 0 is something that you have like a self-study, some background knowledge that you need to obtain independently. Then they have these 3 levels, basic, intermediate, and advanced, which are trained inside of the project. I think, Sara, basic is also for genera, and intermediate and advanced are for species, if I'm okay.
Yes,
And
yes.
then in the experts, you train people to be alpha taxonomists and to give courses to be like the trainers of the following courses. So they have these 5 different levels of training. And this is what we are now doing. We are training the people for doing the future monitoring. And if you have some questions from this part, we are happy to answer all of them.
Thank you. I think there are about 3 questions to answer. There's one still a late one from the previous section. It
Okay.
said, as far as I knew, a third of bee species in Europe are threatened, but from your image, it seems there are new evaluations where conservation status has been improved. Is that also your experience, or is the one third, a normal number that's thrown out there that's not based on the facts?
No, no, really for bees. So we are now having the data for the updated red list that is now in the process of publication. Will be available soon. And the data that's there, it's quite. It has been looked by the specialist for every species. The specialist of the group was behind checking it, so the assessments are quite robust in this sense. And the difference from this red list to the previous red list is that in the previous red list we had a big chunk, like almost 60% of the fauna, data deficient. So we didn't know if they were gone, if they were good or bad in the population size, in the trends. And now we reduced this data deficient to a bit more than 10%. So now the picture is more clear, and we think that the situation of this is okay-ish, a bit better than compared to other groups like hoverflies. One of the things that explains this is that bees, as I said, they like warm climates. And it might sound weird, but with climate change, they can expand to new areas. Like, for example, in Belgium, we are starting to see Mediterranean species that, because it's getting warmer here, like they are kind of migrating. But at the same time, we are getting a limited picture because the evaluation is done through the map. So we still don't have enough data at the population trends. And this is very important, and this information that we're currently lacking. So if we do, like in 10 years, another update of the red list, we would need to focus more on population trends, definitely.
Thank you very much. That's actually pretty helpful and hopeful news. So, yay. Um, for that, I think we can combine the next 2 questions. And it says, how can someone apply for these courses, and what is the level of involvement and the role of citizen science within the monitoring schemes? So, I guess the question is, are these levels just for experts, or is it for students and professionals in taxonomy, or is it also open to the general public?
That's a difficult question, actually, because here a lot of interest for the member states is applying. So, the idea for us, and maybe Sarah can add something to this. In the case of Epic Fly, we start with the people coming from the basic course. So, really, people with low knowledge in taxonomy can be part of this training. But it's true that at some point up to now we have been prioritizing the people that the member states wanted us to train, because they are in theory the ones that are going to be part of the monitoring. But maybe in the future we can open this to more independent or student people. This is something that has started, so up to now we are just doing what member states want us to do. And regarding the citizen science, at the beginning with the spring project, this first project that I mentioned that tried the monitoring, the idea was to do all this monitoring sampling with citizen science, with volunteers. But really, we conclude with this project that citizen science is a very valuable tool, because it is. But for this kind of analysis, we do need people with enough knowledge to be able to use the information that we got wisely and in a way that it's fruitful at some point. And we need the people with the knowledge to obtain a good quality data. So citizen science was discarded as an option to be able to do the monitoring. We want them to be involved because it's really a powerful tool, and also it's good for doing like some, how to say, like for the people to be aware of what is happening. So that's why citizens are going to be included at some point, but we are not going to rely all this in them. And that's where we are prioritizing now the training of the people that is going to be part of this, like in a professional way. I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself. Maybe Sarah, you want to add something about this?
Yeah, I think the key point of what you're saying is the professionalization,
Mm-hmm.
because what we also had during spring with the volunteers was there was a high turnover. Like people was engaged 1 year but not the next because they were not available for some reason, and there was a lot of investment in the people and training them to do the monitoring and to identify the specimens, and then these people dropped out, and then there was new people, and it was a really costly process also in terms of investing resources on making it properly. And so the idea was to, as the through the nature restoration regulation, the member states have to, by law, have to conduct the monitoring. So it was kind of like transferring to the member states the organization and the, not forcing, but stimulating the member states to generate a permanent structure inside their country, like having a team that is the one that is gonna do more or less the same team who's gonna do the monitoring in the next year. So we are asking the member states, hey, in your country, who is the people who's gonna do the monitoring? This guy, this guy, this guy. Okay, send them to us, we train them, and you have a good team to kickstart next year the sampling.
Mm-hmm.
And this way it's more, the bias in the data is also reduced and the investment is also lower, and you have like from the beginning good quality data. So in the structural monitoring we don't have volunteers, but there are other ways in which the volunteers can be involved. There are other kind of monitorings going on also.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was quite useful. Just keeping an eye on the time, we should be ending before 5 p.m. CET. I was fascinated in listening to all of this, but I wasn't counting if we've done all 5 sections. Have you, is there another section still, or is this the
One
end?
If
more.
there is
One
one, but
more.
I can
Okay,
make it pretty, it's
thank you.
can make it short.
Cool. Then I'll let you get on with it. Thank you.
Yes. So this is the last part. I'm gonna keep it brief. So how the actions, how to tackle the shortfalls that we have to take, the actions we need to conserve the pollinators from the very basis. We need to teach society insects are not harmful. They are not there to sting you. They are not there to bite you. So don't kill them. It's okay. Then, they also do nice things. They pollinate. So it's kind of different levels of awareness to the general population, and teaching them, like also the politicians, that they change the political agenda. Oh, let's conserve the panda. Yeah, but there are bees also. Like the panda depends on bees, on hoverflies. Like teaching the society in different ways. And then this is where we enter in what the actions that we can do are related to the knowledge that we have. So where we are is we are still describing new species of bees and hoverflies. It's not that it's set in stone. Okay, we have the list of, we know what we have. No, we are still actively all the time finding new species, or oh, we didn't realize this species is the same than this other one. So there is still a lot of effort dedicated to the basis. So we cannot go to the top if we didn't finish the basic stuff. There is also that we need to understand where they are. So we need to create the maps, for example, the ones we use for the red list. We need to understand, sorry about that, I live next to a hospital. We need to understand the population dynamics. That is like a second stage. When we have a better knowledge of where they are, we can understand if they are going okay or not. So this is related to the information is related to the actions that we can take. Like as a public, the most important thing that I think that we can ask the public is to learn what do we have and what the pollinators we have, like, and learning to recognize them, to understand the diversity. This is the first step. And here we present the website we're using during the epic projects, and here we are gonna publish all the resources we create. We are creating identification guides, we are creating PowerPoints, online resources, we are creating a lot of stuff. Everything is gonna be there. So take a photo, save the link, because in the next months you're going to see a lot more stuff going on there. So there is like, for example, this resources tool that you have like a search portal, you have national activities, you have uh, identification tools, everything that you can find it there. You can filter by language, by country, by group of pollinators. Then you have in this pollinator section in the upper bar, in the left, pollinators, we have the resources also grouped by the 3 main pollinator groups that we tackle. And in the right side, in the get involved, in the country page, when we are finding in different countries activities in which the people can get involved, or national centers that are the reference center for pollinators in that country, we also put the information there. And this is also some useful things created by the commission. It was, I think, 2019 they created this. It's a PDF per country. Sam, you can take a picture of the link if you want to see it later on. And they made a PDF per country in which they explain what are the pollinator activities going on in the country, who is the responsible entity in charge of them. And so you have the link to the institution so you can get in touch with them if needed. And for the last thing, please take pictures. Take a lot of pictures. One of the things we're missing the most is like we're creating all this content for Epic, etc. For butterflies is quite okay, but for bees and hoverflies, we are really missing nice pictures, especially in the field, that we can use for making training material, that we can make for online material, stuff like that. So it's gonna be super useful for us if you take the pictures and if you post them in iNaturalist, Observation International, the one that you prefer the most, and you make them freely accessible to the community so we can take them and we can use it for training material. That will be amazing for us. And that's it. If you have any questions for this short section.
Thank you very much. I think that was a really interesting section, and I'm sure there are quite a few questions. Perhaps there's one already. If you could potentially put those links straight into the chat, that would be really
Actually, that's a
useful.
good point. Or if it's already a bit late, I can send them via email and you can distribute them.
Yes, that would be great. I will be sending everyone an outcomes email, which will have the links to the recordings as well, and any links mentioned in the presentations as well.
I have just put the one in the Pollinator Academy. Sorry to interrupt.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. What really I found really inspiring about it is when thinking about the Europark Junior Ranger program, thinking that the nature restoration regulation is going into force soon and they will need these experts from soon till forever, hopefully. That can also be, talking to young teenagers now who might have an interest in pollinators to tell them, there will be really good career options in this field in the future. And also knowing that the government has got a group of experts that could be a really great resource for inviting speakers to come speak to the junior rangers, or experts to come and do surveys that the junior rangers can go and attend along and see how they work. So it's been really helpful. Thank you so much for sharing. If anybody else still has any questions, I know it's 5 o'clock on the dot, but perhaps we can stay a minute or two. Yeah, I can see a lot of people are very grateful. Clapping hands are coming through and lots of reactions in the chat. That's really great. We also have a feedback form in the chat. This will be for this part too. So I know it will look exactly the same as for those of you who filled out the feedback from yesterday, but we'd like to ask you to do one after each session so that we can, send that feedback to our speakers as well. I'd like to say a big thank you. So I see there are no questions in the chat. I think that also means that you, Sara and Andrea, have done a great job. Thank you very much for spending your free time to come and speak with all of us and to share your vast amounts of knowledge. It's been really a pleasure having you and a pleasure to ask questions from the really simple to the really detailed. So thank you very much. And I'm sure that everybody is inspired to go out there and yeah, talk to young people about the future of pollinators in Europe.
Thank you for inviting us. It really has been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for assisting.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Then I would like to wish everybody here a lovely afternoon, and thank you all for attending and for staying for the 1.5 hours. It's really been lovely to see yeah, that everybody is interested in this topic. So, thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Bye.